So with that, we're going to start with a couple of fun questions. And I would like everyone to write in the chat, how many living languages do you think are currently in the world? How many languages? In the whole entire world, how many languages? So take a second real quick and type in there your best estimate. How many languages are there in the world? All right, we get some guesses over there. All right, are you ready for the answer? All right. There are 7,117 languages recognized as languages as per the Ethnologue, which is the authority for linguistics. They keep track of all the languages. 7,117 languages in the world. And with that, we need to understand too that there are languages that have lived and have died, Latin is not really a spoken language. We still study it, but it's not a language per se of a group of people anymore. And there are other languages like that in other parts of the world. There's also areas of the world that have not been explored, like in South America, for example, in the Amazon area. There is still a couple of groups of people that we have not reached. So we don't know much about their language. We don't know if it's different than their neighbors. So this is an estimate, but recognize there are 7,117. Can you imagine? But tonight we're only talking about learning 2. All right, next question. And again, I want you to write your answers in the chat, your best guesses, and everyone can participate. The question is, what are the top 5 most spoken languages in the world? So which ones do you think are the languages that are most spoken by the number of people that speak them? What are the top 5 most spoken languages? So number 1 would be the one that you think is the most spoken. Number 2, second place, third. So write it in the chat real quick. Which one do you think would be the first language? Which one is the most spoken in the world? I'll wait a couple of seconds so the chat can come in, okay? All right, we have some answers. All right, there's a little bit of a debate about this because it depends on whether you include only native speakers or the people that are also learning the language. And then if we include the people that are learning the language, how can we say that they are actually proficient, So the numbers will fluctuate and will change. But here we go. Are you ready for the reveal? Sorry. I keep pushing the arrows thinking. All right, let's see. There we go. All right, so yes, number 1 is English. A lot of people in the world are trying to learn English, and there are a lot of native speakers of English. And it's not just the United States, they're all over the world. There are other countries whose language officially is English as well. They said at the Ethnologue counted about 1,132 million people that are English speakers as of the 23rd edition, which I believe it was in the beginning of this year that they compiled. So they're probably more by now. The second place goes to Mandarin Chinese, and they have 1,117 million people who speak Mandarin Chinese. It's a very popular language these days. And then in third place, I was surprised, Hindi is the third place. And that went with 615 million. And I kept going because I wanted to find where Spanish was, because, that's my second language. Spanish is 534 million people who are native and who are learning how to speak it. And then in fifth place, we have French. and they have 280 million people learning it or already speaking it. Okay? So I thought that was a little bit interesting here. So, again, I repeat, if you want to type a question from here on, please go to the question and answer and type your question, and we'll give some time to answer at the end of the presentation. All right, so what is a language? How do we know we are communicating? How do we know our words are effective? Just one language is very challenging, right? And if we just learn our first language, I mean, that's hard enough. I mean, you have a toddler and you're teaching them, and you want to make sure that they understand, and sometimes maybe they understand and they just don't want to do what we tell them. So how do we know when they're really getting the meaning? The goal of a language is to communicate. How do we know that what we are saying is communicating what we mean? And then bilingualism, just add a little bit to the mix. We're going to talk about how it actually makes it better and easier to communicate, even though a lot of people actually throughout the years have believed that it was going to complicate things more. So what does it mean to be bilingual? We're going to have the definition first. It's very basic. As an adjective, when we say someone is bilingual, talking about a person, we're talking about someone who can speak two languages fluently. For example, a bilingual secretary would be able to write letters in Spanish and letters in English, or letters in French, or Farsi, whatever language they're bilingual with, and the other language, okay? So they will be able to use both languages to complete whatever tasks they have. A noun, so they are a bilingual, for example, is a person who is fluent in two languages. And the example there is, as highly fluent bilinguals, the owners and employees can easily choose the language they will use with children on such visits. And that's from the Oxford Dictionary. So very basic, it just means that they're people who are able to use both languages. Now, I asked you a question tonight, and I wish I could see you and have you talk with me if we were in a room, but we're not. So feel free to use the chat if you want to talk to me, so I don't feel lonely. But is it beneficial to know more than one language? In history, which, a lot of times is really sad when we find out what people used to believe before, there was actually a time where people thought that being bilingual was a bad thing, if you can imagine that. People actually even took it almost as a handicap. When people came to the United States and they did not speak English, but they spoke some other language, they thought that they had some kind of problem because they were not able to communicate in English, and they thought that knowing another language was only going to make them not be as efficient here with English in the United States. And then they started doing research about it, and they figured out that, oh my goodness, there are so many advantages to learning another language. But what does it really mean that somebody knows another language? I'm going to give you a little bit of theory. Not all bilinguals are the same, but different people can have different levels of bilingualism. And, in a very basic, by no means I consider myself an expert. I teach language, so I have studied a little bit, and I do have a master's in curriculum and instruction. So I've only studied it a little bit, okay? And I'm going to give you just a little bit of what I know. First up, we have simultaneous, which would be a person who has one set of concepts and two languages. So this will be the child that, for example, maybe has one parent who speaks English and one parent who speaks Spanish, and they learn both languages at the same time. They look at a phone, for example, and they will think telephone and teléfono at the same time. But to them, it's the same item because they have gotten that idea in their mind since they were little. They were not separate things. We also have consecutive, like one after the other. And that would be someone who learns one language first. So I was a consecutive because I learned Spanish first. That was my native language. And up until the age of 15, I spoke nothing but Spanish. Then at the age of 15, I came to the United States. And I began my journey learning English so that I could communicate in my world. And I found myself that a lot of times I was filtering, if you will, what my thoughts were and the concepts that I was learning about things in my new world through my first language. So let me give you some examples. In Spanish, we have gender. And in English, we don't really assign gender to things. So I had a friend of mine who in college had gotten a car. And he brought it to the school, and he was super excited, and we were all celebrating for him. And he said, "Isn't she beautiful?" And that was a moment where I just looked at him and thought, she? Because in Spanish, a car has a masculine attribute. We would say el carro, which is like, he. So when we talk about a car, we always refer to the machine as a he. And it kind of rocked my world a little bit because I never thought of a car as a she. But to him, that was, his friend, his new girlfriend was his car. And I thought that was pretty funny. But that's what happens when we learn a first language and then we try to filter the second world that we're learning through the first language. So the best thing to do is try to learn the second language, kind of like immersion instead of translating back and forth. Because if not, we will be understanding the world in light of the first language, and we might miss something because languages have a lot to do with culture. And the moment that we try to look at a language through the filters of another language, we kind of miss a little bit of the meaning in it, okay? And then last, we have passive. And that would be the student who understands the second language, but they have a lot of difficulty speaking it. And we have here in the schools, we have both the students who learn Spanish first, and they know their Spanish, and then they came and they're learning the English, but they have a lot of difficulty speaking English, though they understand a lot. Or we have the ones that were born here, and they learn English first because they're already here, but at home, they haven't been practicing their language, and it's very difficult for us as parents, because I have 2 children, and I was trying to figure it out. I did not do a good job, I confess, about making my children bilingual since they were little, because I did not understand the whole process. I learned later. And now my daughter speaks it pretty well, and she's, getting to the point. When I was doing the presentation, she actually looked at it, and she's like, "Mom, do you think I'm passive?" And I said, I would like to think that you're consecutive at this point, because she can't communicate. So, but, and that's why we're here, because I know that a lot of us see our children, and, we see them in school, and they are learning a lot, and then we tend to get frustrated. I heard from a lot of parents that they're upset that their student is not speaking their home language anymore when they're learning English. So we want to talk a little bit about that, because keeping that language is such a gift, and we want to encourage you to do that. The human brain is capable of so much more than we give it credit for. Before, they used to think, as I told you before, that it made it a lot harder. And actually, I made that mistake. I believed my pediatrician when my kids were little, because my son, he actually ended up having a little bit of dyslexia. And so he wasn't picking up the Spanish like I wanted him when he was a toddler. He got to be about 3 years old and he wasn't speaking. So I was advised to change to complete English, because if he needed help with speech, he would be able to get more benefits with the English. And so I did that, and I regret that decision, because if I would have stuck with it, I know that he would have become bilingual. Both of them would have. And so, the human brain is capable of doing so much more than we give it credit for. And understand that, for example, you parents, you can learn English. If that's your battle and you're trying to learn it, and you don't, and sometimes you feel like, oh, I can't learn this. It used to be said before that, there was this theory of the critical age period, where they said that a person could not learn a language after they were in their early teen years. And for years and years, in fact, when I did psychology in college, they still believed that there was a critical period that after you turn into a preteen or a teen, early days in teenage years, you would not be able to acquire a second language as a native. However, with all the research and all the work that has been done now in linguistics, we have realized that, yes, you can become bilingual. If you work hard at it, you can get it. New information about brain capabilities develops every single day, and that's one of the things. Being bilingual is not a handicap. Being bilingual is not a problem. Being bilingual is a gift, and we need to support it. There are many benefits at being bilingual. So just remember, the human brain is capable of learning a language at any age. So all my parents here, you can learn English. And all students here, you can learn your home language, whether that be Spanish, French, Farsi, Swahili. We have so many languages here. It's beautiful. Keep at it because it's very important. Okay? All right. If you have any questions, remember, please write them down, okay, and in the question and answer or in the chat. So I have a question here. Will a bilingual student be proficient in both languages, or would that push them back on one or the other language they are learning? So that's an excellent question, and I am glad you asked that, because it has been believed in the past that the second language would interfere with the first language. However, now we know that as long as we support both languages can be equally supported. So for a moment, maybe, so for example, you get a little toddler and you're teaching them both languages, maybe they might seem like they will have a little bit of delay. And that is because they're getting double the amount of work. But at some age and early on is better, it will even up and they will be able to carry both languages. That's what the research says now. And that's why I took the time to make sure that I went to research that is valid and reviewed so that we know the latest information that has come up about brain capability and language acquisition. Okay? So yes, a bilingual student can be proficient in both languages. It will take a moment and they will have to work at it on both so that they are sure that they're not losing one. And one thing that is really important is that they study the two languages independently, that they're not trying to translate into the other, because that translation takes away from the other language. So it's best to do the thinking in the language that you're trying to learn. Okay? All right, moving on. Speaking is connecting words with the world around us. That's all it is. It's really amazing. I do this exercise in my Spanish beginners classes where I tell my students, I give them this scenario. And if you were here in the same room with me, I would probably have done that. So I'll just tell you what I do. I would tell them, I would get two volunteers. Usually it's like a girl and a boy or something like that, right? And then the girl would be, the victim, so to speak. And she would just stand in the front, and then I would take the guy to the side, and I would tell him, hey, look, you're going to ask her to go to the movies with you at 7 p.m. on Friday to go watch The Incredibles. And he's like, okay. And then I say, but the only thing that you can say is unga unga. You cannot use any words in any language, English or Spanish. You can only say unga unga, kind of like the cave people. That was the idea. And it's hilarious how they begin to use that unga unga word, which is the only tool that they have to communicate, to try to come up with a way with their hand motions and facial expressions, trying to let her know, what 7 is. They would say unga, 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 and doing it 7 times to count the 7. Very interesting how we as humans just naturally assign meaning to sounds. And that's what words are. They're sounds that have a meaning that we have given them. And so we interpret the world that way. Languages change the way we think. there are many different ways, to say things, and we might have a word, and it might be, for example, in Spanish we have a lot of words for palma, would be like the palm of your hand, but it can also be like a palm tree. So it depends on the context. Your brain would automatically assign the meaning to the word depending on the context of where you are. So it's very interesting what we do with those sounds. We assign direction, time, we count things, and sometimes those words, the words themselves won't say it, but it's the meaning that we give them and how we manipulate those sounds. All right, and so what are the benefits of being bilingual? Research, there's tons of research about it, and we'll just talk a little bit about a few things. So physically, there are actual physical benefits for the brain. They say that now that they're studying the brain, when someone is bilingual, they know 2 or more languages, the gray matter in the brain, which helps us to process things better, actually increases, and it's thicker, and the more we have, the better it is. Bilinguals, by far, have a significant more, greater amount of gray matter in their brains. Their brains are healthier. They have noticed that people who become bilingual, even if they have like Alzheimer's and diseases like that in the family, usually being bilingual alone will delay those diseases because they will have a more active brain, and it would help with that. And it's something that, you can read those studies. I wrote that in there. Clogger in 2013 came up with a lot of these ideas. So you're welcome to look it up in Google and find the information. It's fascinating, the studies that they have done to find out the benefits of being bilingual. It gives you more brain power, because when you look at things a certain way, you can make an idea of it. So for example, if you see my hand like this, and I ask you to describe my hand, you will describe my fingers, perhaps the ring and things like that. But if I describe my hands, I would describe the fingers, and I would describe maybe my nails. Well, they're not done today, but you wouldn't be able to see that. When we are bilingual, we have 2 different ways to see the world. And so it increases your brain capacity, it increases your ability. So high performance, for example, solving problems. It increases your ability to solve problems because you can look at things from different perspectives. Your mental flexibility too. They say that people who are bilingual might not get as frustrated in communication because they have another set of skills in a different language to be able to communicate. And so just in general, there are a lot of benefits, physical and executive, and how to use our brain. There are these things called neurons in our brain. Okay, we have connections, and that's just a little picture that kind of illustrates what they might look like in our brain. Our brain is full of connections, and the more connections we have, the more we will be able to communicate. You see someone who is super smart, who is able to do math and really quickly, those people would have a lot of connections in their brain. Or I admire translators and who, take interpreters who immediately can translate from one language to the other in real time. And that's a gift in itself. So their brains are very well connected to be able to get all that information through. And when someone is bilingual, those connections are actually, they have more connections in their brain. They've been able to physically see brains of people. They've studied people who are bilingual and people who are monolingual, just one language, and they have seen that the bilingual people have by far a lot more connections in their brain. That's fascinating. There's also social benefits to being bilingual. Obviously, we'll be able to communicate with different sets of people because we will have 2 different languages, and so enhances our communication. We may also have increased opportunities for a job because nowadays companies all over the place are looking for people who can communicate with more customers. And being bilingual gives you that opportunity. You would have better cultural understanding and perhaps, enhanced travel experience. And those are just some of the benefits socially of knowing another language. Okay, now, let's talk about language in light of distance learning. So distance learning is a tool. And we use tools to, do certain jobs. And sometimes, for example, a hammer you can use to construct something, but you can also use a hammer to destroy something. Have you ever seen those shows when they have the home makeovers and they do demolition and they have a hammer that they're using or a mallet and they destroy everything? They can be used for that too. Well, distance learning has become kind of like that kind of tool for us. I know I've heard from a lot of parents, who have been frustrated because of the technology, but we're going to talk about that tonight in light of the benefits that distance learning can give us right now as far as supporting our students at home with their home language. Okay? So, your language is a gift. And it's a gift that I am not sure, some parents have been working on it with their students at home. Some other parents, they have been working really hard outside of the home, so they haven't had time. So there are some challenges. And right now, I would like to hear from my parents. And in the chat, I want you to write down in there, tell me, what are some challenges about your students at home not learning your language? Or you can tell me, my children know my language. Or you can tell me, it's very hard to practice Spanish. My kids don't want to learn it, or whatever other language you might speak, French, Chinese. So write in the chat. I would like to hear from a couple of people. What is it hard or is it easy for you to practice your home language? And we'll give it a couple of seconds to come in because we have a lot to cover. Any takers? Is it easy for you? Do your children know your language? Okay, great. It's awesome. It has been easy. They're bilingual at home. That means that they've done some intentional work, though. Okay, anybody has had a hard time? All right, because of time, we're gonna keep going. So, distance learning, the family schedule, family sharing space, especially if you have multiple children and they all have to be in a quiet space where they can do their school all day, family dynamics, undefined expectations, all of that has become a problem for a lot of families. I've spoken with so many parents who don't know what to do, and we've talked about some of the things that they can do to manage that. But then, at the same time, those things that sometimes seem like a difficulty can maybe become something that is a benefit to us. So, now that we have to change the family schedule, we can actually schedule family time. And when you schedule family time, make sure to be using your home language because they will pick up the English, but they really, really, really will benefit from learning your home language. And then, family sharing space is very difficult, but you know what? We have family together time now. So let's use that time to practice our home language. And then family dynamics, it can be a little tricky sometimes. Well, we can make it an intentional effort to have positive interactions with the family. And if we have a goal in mind, like practicing a language or something like that, maybe we can have some great positive family interactions. Before, I called it undefined expectations, but it was, a lot of parents didn't know what their students were doing in school. So now that the students are at home and doing lessons on the computer, the parents seem to have a little bit more understanding of what the students are covering every day. Their priorities are changing. And so now we understand that there are things that have to be done, they have to be turned in. So the expectations are being more defined for the parents, and the priorities now are being put more in place, I believe. Because when parents are involved, the kids thrive. All right, so what can your family do to support bilingual skills? And, there's 3 questions I have for you. Actually, 4 questions. What can you do? What will you do? And then when will you do it? And how will you do it? And those are the questions that we're going to try to go over tonight. Well, first of all, I want to cover the idea of the attitude. And I don't mean it in a bad way. It's just, attitude, like what is our belief of being bilingual? Because sometimes our students, I have native speakers in my classes, and half of my students don't appreciate their language. And they tell me, I don't speak Spanish. I was forced to be in this class. And, and then I hope to help them to learn to love their language. I want us to have the attitude that being bilingual is a gift, because it is. There's so many benefits that come with it. So for your attitude to be positive and to be of a patient person and be informed, okay? So be positive about it. Make sure that you let your students know that it is a positive thing, that it's a gift. Help them to see the benefit, because students don't get motivated if they don't see a benefit to something. But if they see the benefit in something, then they will be motivated to want to conquer it. And then be patient with them, because they're not going to pick it up all of a sudden. They will not have the same experience that we had when we were learning the language. So be patient with them. If they mispronounce things, don't make fun of them. Instead, tell them how glad you are that they are trying to speak the language. And then be informed. Find out ways that you can promote them learning. If you don't feel like you have time or resources or patience to be able to teach them yourself, there are many apps nowadays that you can use, and you can put them on there to try to practice their language at home, okay? So that attitude is very important. Let's think about it. This is a gift. This is a treasure. Let's go for it, okay? And then the second thing is the approach. So that's the how. How are we going to do this? We're in a worldwide pandemic. We're at home. We have to work because we have to pay for, the home. And what are we going to do, and how are we going to do it? So that's the plan that we're going to have. And there are some practical things that we can do at home that would be very helpful to promote and support the learning of the language. For example, speaking it, basic, just practice it. Speak to them. Even if they speak back to you in English, continue to speak to them in your own language. And then read to them. And I know that it's probably easier when the students are smaller, little, like kindergarten and elementary school. But believe it or not, in high school, you can still read to them. You can find reading pieces that interest you or them, even, magazines, biographies of people they care for, if they like sports, whatever it may be. Look for things that you can both read together in your own language. You can cook. Make a cooking session where you only speak your language, and so that they learn the measurements, for example, of the ingredients that you are using, the names of the ingredients, the verbs that you are using to do the action of cooking, like cutting and baking and all of that, preparing. Use those words in your own language and have your students with you learning them while you cook. So they can, if they like cooking, they won't be focusing so much on the language. They will be focusing on the cooking aspect, but you will use that language to transfer that knowledge, and they will be able to take it better. Also, playing games. Games are a very good thing. I don't see a whole lot of Hispanic families playing games, and I don't know how it might be in other cultures, but it's something that I strongly support, because during playing times, you can learn a lot. Practice it. Practice it in different ways. Reading it, speaking it, writing it. If you have a board, like a whiteboard at home, write messages to your kids during the day. And you can do it in your own language so that they can keep seeing that language. And so basically just create good habits. Create good habits that associate the language with positive interactions. So, don't do like some people I know who, when they get really angry, they resort to their basic, to their home language. And so the kids know that if mom is yelling in Spanish and that means she's really angry at me, don't associate your language with negative feelings, because then that will turn your students off. Reward them. If they did something great, you talk to them in Spanish. Oh, lo hiciste bien. You did it great. Talk to them in your language and associate it with good, positive interactions, so that would motivate them to want to know it, to want to practice it. All right. So, last question over here. What and when? That's very important. You gotta have a plan, because a lot of times we do things and we don't really have a plan on how to execute it, and then it just doesn't happen. I homeschooled my students for a very long time, my 2 children at home, and I love books. So I have a household full of books. I think at some point my kids told me that we seem to have more books than the library did. We have a lot of books. The sad thing is that we didn't do all the books. We did most of them and a lot of them, but we didn't do all of them because we didn't have a plan. So we just got carried away getting more and more, but we needed a plan. When are we going to do this? And so to be able to practice a language and learn a language or any skill, you need to have an action plan. So schedule time with your family. When are you going to be intentional about learning your language? Even if it's, a cooking day a week, or a sit-down session where you read, once, twice a week, or maybe every other night you want to read to your students in Spanish. Some families do that, where they alternate English one day and Spanish the next day. Figure out what works with your family schedule and design a plan. Where you're going to include family activities, you're going to decide what will the goals be. Can you entice your children to want to learn the language so that they have a part in deciding what it is that you are going to do together to practice the language so they can learn it? Schedule activity together. Okay, make sure that you have a calendar, a family calendar of realistic expectations. Make it realistic, because if it's not realistic, it's going to be very difficult to follow through with it. So, and make sure you include things that interest everybody. Mom, dad, all children should have a say in what activities are done, because when we force them to do something they don't like, they're not going to be that motivated. So find out what fits in your family schedule, what activities and goals you guys have as a family, and, just schedule it in, put it in the calendar, okay? And that's for practical recommendations. That's what I have. And so now I wanted to make sure that we have a significant amount of time to talk about questions that you might have. So if you have any questions, you can raise your hand and someone will unmute you so that you can ask your question, or you can type it in the chat and tell us your question. I will give you a couple of minutes to come up with questions. Or you can also share with me, what are you doing that is working? That would be something great that we can do tonight. If I can have some people sharing, what are you doing to study your language at home with your students? What has worked so that your family can be bilingual? Anybody can share.
Hi, Monica. It's Cindy with ESOL. I actually wanted to tell you, I was going to ask you, and then you mentioned it. I talked to my 3-year-old in Spanish, and he responds to me in English. And no matter how hard I try, he'll keep going in English. But I was going to ask you, what do? Do I just immerse him? And you definitely answered my question. I'm just going to talk to him in Spanish, as hard as it may be sometimes, because my brain will think in English, and I'll have to translate that myself. I also really related to what you were saying about being a student and not always wanting to embrace your mother tongue, because I remember being 11, 12 and being corrected by my family and being like, no, don't tell me. I don't care, right? And now I'm an adult and I need it so badly.
exactly.
So I'm actually taking my first native speaker class as an adult now, so wish me luck. Thank you for your
Oh, yay. Congratulations. That's great.
Thank you.
Yes, no, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing, Cindy. Yes, that's exactly it. So your 3-year-old, oh my gosh, just enjoy them. And that's totally fine. At some point when they see that you are using Spanish, they will want to click over. And there will be a moment where they'll click over. So right now, they probably learn English first, and English tends to be a little bit easier. And so just, do things that they like to do, like the toys that they like or movies that they like, do them in Spanish. One movie that I use with my students in classes, I used Toy Story. They have it in Spanish. And that's a great movie because it has child-level vocabulary throughout the whole movie. And so that's something that helps them. And they see the characters and they love the characters, so they will want to speak like the characters do. So just my recommendation is associate the language with fun stuff and a lot of rewards, and that works.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, somebody else, we have a few minutes for questions, so let's talk about it. Or share with us, what have you done that is working? I'll tell you, while the questions come up, one, for example, with me, I had 2 children. And then my son was the first one, then I had a daughter. They're about a year apart or so, a year and a half. And my son, because he struggled so much with the Spanish, I didn't force him because I got the wrong advice to switch to English and not do Spanish anymore for him. So then when my daughter was born, she also had a little bit of dyslexia, but hers is a different thing than my son has. She would have been able to pick up the Spanish a lot easier, but at that point, I didn't push it as much. We did some Spanish here and there, vocabulary, songs and things, but I did not push it like I should have. And she always told me later on, she said, Mom, I really would have liked to have learned. So later on, when I was homeschooling her in high school, we took some classes, and she did Spanish 1, 2, and 3 with me, and she got to the point that she was reading literature. So then at the University of Maryland, she's taken a couple of classes, and she's doing really well. She's, at the point that she can read literature. And, she doesn't think that she's bilingual yet, but she knows more than she thinks. And I'm really glad that she wants it. And she actually wants her children to learn Spanish because she realizes how precious it would be if she knew it really well now. She has translated a couple of times. She went with Jennifer one day. Jennifer Love invited her to the University of Maryland to help be a translator for some parents that went to visit the school, and that was great. So, she sees the value of it. So they will appreciate it in the future, so we just need to stick with it. Any other questions? Well, that's awesome. Someone says they translate books in Spanish. That's great. Yes, that's really good. I used to translate songs and things like that with my kids at home to practice. Anybody else? What else do you do? Do you read to them at night? Reading stories at night is a great way to connect with them. I also having like little hand puppets, especially with the really young ones. You can play with them, or maybe act a story. So they're looking at the puppets instead of looking at the language itself, and they want to identify with the characters. So there are a lot of things that we can do. My recommendation, yes, a lot of music in Spanish. Yes, that is absolutely right. A lot of music in Spanish. They have tons of really good materials. If you go to YouTube, you can find short stories read to them. You can find activities that you can do with them. Another thing that you can do is crafts, arts and crafts. You can take a craft and, speak to them in Spanish while you're doing it if your child is the type that likes that kind of thing. So just choose what they really enjoy, what they really like, and then transfer that to your language. All right, no questions? Well, it's been a pleasure having everyone here. Do we have anything else, Kathleen? No more questions?
There was one more question in the chat about what to tell parents who only want their students to speak English.
Let me see. Was it up? I missed it.
Oh, it just went to me. It says, What can we tell parents who want their children to function only in English, even though they speak Spanish at home?
Right, and that, that is a great question. I'm glad that they asked, because yes, they will regret it later. Let's just say they will regret it later. I understand that, we're here in the society and English is the main language that we need to function everywhere. But if we have the basics of another language, it will really serve us well. It's a big benefit to have a second language. I mean, just getting, job opportunity. We will be able to earn a lot more if we are bilingual. So if the parents can see the benefits of being bilingual in terms of, even financial and social and all of that, gain for their students, so maybe they can reconsider, they need to rest assured that the other language is not going to interfere with their performance in English, because they will get the English. But if they lose the other language, it will be really tragic, because, like Cindy said, now she has to go take lessons, and pay for classes when she could have just learned the language back when she was young. And it is easier. You can learn it at any time, but it is much easier. Kids don't have to pay bills and, do a lot of other things that we have to do as adults, or manage our time to take care of others. They can just focus on learning. And so if we can give them that gift of language, it will really, really benefit them. Parents will just have to consider the choices and realize, wow, yes, that is a big benefit that I can give my child. So let them, and not just let them, but support them and encourage them in learning their language. So thank you. Any other questions?